Hi, I'm Scotty. Our YouTube channel is BuiltClever. In this video, I'm making a chess game. This video is about programming, but more so it's mainly the conceptual idea of how to get a computer to understand the rules of chess. So for things like piece movement for valid moves, taking pieces, special moves like castling, and understanding checks and checkmates. It does not include the AI for playing against the computer in this video. We're going to hook it up to the Stockfish open source chess engine in a later video. If you just want to see the chess game in action and not so much how we made it, our next video will be about that. Me and Becky are making a chess table in our other videos, and after a bit more work, this will be the brains to control that. If you haven't seen our other videos, check them out on our channel, and I'll put a link below in the description. We are attempting to bring computer chess into the real world, meaning playing chess on a real chessboard with real chess pieces against the computer or each other with computer-like features like move validation, an eval bar, check and checkmate monitoring, and storing a list of moves so we can replay them back later and examine our games. All the best bits of computer chess with a real chessboard. So this is the computer chess part of that build. I will open source the code at some point. Subscribe to this video and give it a like to help our channel and follow our progress. We could use some more subscriptions as we're just a new channel. So if you find this video interesting or it helps you build your own chess game or teaches you something extra about chess, please give us a subscription. I programmed this in Microsoft Visual Basic, but know a lot more people use C#, so I'll upload the code in C# when I do that, as I know it quite well as also. So we're going to start building our chess game now. So I've started off with a new project and I've got a simple form. And here we're going to make a user control to put the chessboard on so we can size it later. So we've just got some simple resize code that will define the board to the actual window size. And in our paint event, we've got some code to just double buffer the graphics to stop it from flickering. But the main code is in the paint board. So we go through each row, then each column, and we figure out the rank number based on the row we're on and the file letter based on the column we're on. And here we build up the square size and look at if we're painting white to go in and paint a white square and then set it to black. And then when we're painting black, we'll do a black square and then also do an outline on the board. So I've built that previously. So here I can drag the board onto our form. And as you can see, it's a nice board and it actually resizes the size of the squares as you change the size of it. So now if I just anchor that, we can run the app and we've got a nice little board going here. So that's a great first step. So I've updated the code and added some rank headings in here and some file headings in here. And now when we run it, we can see we've got some nice ranks down here and files across here, which will make identifying the squares a lot easier. And they all resize. So the next bit is to find some chess piece images we can use. So I found these cool ones on this website, and it's under a CC license, which just means you've got to give attribution to the author, which I'll include in the description below. So we'll download these ones, full resolution, and I'll import these images into my game. I've imported the images now. I just converted them to icon files to make it a little easier to work with. So they're all in there. So the next step is we'll make a class to store the pieces. So here I've just made a nice little class. It just has what type that comes from this enum and what color that comes from this enum, with a new function that makes it easy to add them. So we'll also need our board to have some smarts behind it. So I've made a board class where I've got a square which states what file and rank the square is and what piece, if any, is on that square. So that will be null if there isn't a piece on it. And added some little functions like a notation one here and a collection of the squares to store them all with nice add functions that use files and ranks and item functions to get the square by file and rank or notation. Now we've got the pieces and squares, I'll add them to our board. So as the form loads, I call this board setup routine. And here I make a new board, which is a collection of our squares. And then I'll just do a loop through the ranks and files, adding a square to each part of the board, and then go through and add the chess pieces. So here I can use the items notation, and for the piece, set it to a new piece and say what piece and what color I want. So I've just gone through and added all the black pieces and all the white pieces. And then we put that collection into our actual user control board, which is over here. So as we're looping through drawing the squares, we can now have a look and say, is there a piece on this square? And if so, then we go in and set up a size for it and call this draw piece image, which is just simply get the icon and draw the image. So we get the icon with this get piece icon, which is just a select case for what piece we're after to get it from the resource file. So if we give that a run now, you can see we've got some nice chess pieces on the board, and using the icons with a few different sizes, we can even make them resize quite well. So off to a good start. The next bit is to detect when a user clicks on a piece and wants to move it. So in the mouse down event, added a hit test function, which just goes through the rows and columns looking for where the cursor of the mouse was clicked to get the file and the rank, and then do some code to send back the piece that was selected. And then I've got the mouse move to detect movement and the mouse up to know when they've let it go. So let's have a look at that working. So now if you click on one, it draws a circle to show it's selected. And at the moment there's no smart, so you can grab a piece and move it, but you can drop it wherever you want. There's no logic to determine what is a valid move or not. Got the code to validate the moves working now, so I'll give you a look at that. So I've added a piece selected event for when a piece is selected with the mouse, and added a new method to calculate the valid moves and fill a collection with any square that is the valid move for the selected piece. So I'll give you a look at that in a second. So on the board, I've updated the paint routine to paint the valid moves, and that's a simple method that just goes through each valid move in the collection and just draws the circle on any square that is a valid move. And I've also gone into the mouse up, so if they drop a piece, it checks the square they've dropped it on is in the valid move collection, and if not, it will move it back to the original square, so you can only make valid moves from now on. So here's my code to check the valid moves. We pass in the currently selected piece, and then down here I do a select case on what piece type it is, so I can do some code to go and look for all the valid moves for that piece. So this is the check pawn valid moves. So I set up some variables based on what piece color we're looking at. So we want the rank that the pawns start on, as well as the rank that's 1 ahead of it and 2 ahead of it based on what color we're looking at. Then when we go in, we can say if the pawn is on the starting rank, it's got a valid move of 1 ahead or 2 ahead. But if it's anywhere else, then it's only got a valid move of 1 ahead. And then we add that to the valid move collections. Next is the rook valid moves. So they're simple too, they just move in straight lines. So we've got the piece, so we just get all the files to the left. So get files to the left is just the helper function I've added. And all it does is look at the file we're on and gets all the ones to the left of that. And I've added the get files to the right, as well as just get the next file on the right or left. And add them to the valid move collections. Then all the files to the right and add them as well. And then we also check vertically up and vertically down and keep filling the valid move collections. For the bishop valid moves, they're much like the rook ones, but instead of looking in straight lines, we look in diagonal lines. So here I get all the files to the left, but this time as I'm going through them, increment the rank. So I get all the up left direction and add that to the valid moves. Then do the same for down left, then up right and down right. Next is the knight valid moves. So these ones are a little trickier. So for this I get the file on the right, the file 2 on the right, the file on the left, and the file 2 on the left. And then I can go through each possible valid move, which is 8 squares around the horse. So I just look at the move type and check the file on the right and the rank +2, so it's up, right. Then I've got up, right, then up, left, left, and down as well. And then down here, I just check the rank to make sure the piece is still gone on the board. So if the horse is near the side, it won't add a move that's off the board. And any that are valid, add them to the valid move collections. For the queen valid moves, they're actually not too hard to do because the queen can move straight up and down and left and right as well as diagonal. So I can reuse my bishop valid move check as well as my rook valid move check, get the valid move collections for them and just join them together into one collection that becomes the queen's move valid collection. And last is the king valid moves. So they're pretty simple as well because it can move in one square in any direction. So I just do a loop around from 1 to 8 going right around and make sure that is on the board, and if so, add that to its valid moves. Okay, so now that's all done, we'll have a look at it in action. So there's one main problem with this. We've only checked for valid moves and not if other pieces are in the way or anything. You can see as I click on the pieces, it will light up what is valid moves, even though there's still pieces in the way. As well as if I do things like move one out, you can see then it will only allow one move for a pawn instead of the normal 2. And I can move pieces there and see all the valid moves around. As well as now, if we go to move a piece and put it to a wrong location, it will just jump back because that's not a valid move square for it, which is the main goal at the moment. So I've updated the valid moves code to take into account when there's pieces in the way. So that wasn't too hard. All I've got to do is, before I add the valid square, see if there's a piece on it. If there isn't a piece, then it's a valid move. If there is a piece, I look at what color it is. And if it is one of the opponent's pieces, I'm going to add it to an attacked pieces collection. And if it's one of mine, then I exit out of the loop at that point, so it stops adding valid squares after that. And I've done that for the rook moves and all the other moves as well. Now let's see that in action. Now the pawns have the moves, the horses have the moves, but you'll notice this square isn't lighting up. If I go things like bishops or rooks, currently they can't do a valid move. But if I move a piece out of the way, then you can see it allows this way but not that way. And same if I do with the rook. We'll allow it to go to valid locations, but we'll highlight all the valid moves from there. So we're well on our way now. Now that I've added an attacked pieces collection to the valid moves, I've updated the board paint code. So when it's painting the valid moves, if it's the type of a normal move, it just does the normal little circle on the square. But if it's a type of taken piece, I'll draw an ellipse around the piece that you can take. So it'll give an indication that you can take it. So let's see that in action. So now if I move a pawn up and move another one over, you can see when I click there, I can move forward. And this one has a circle around it to indicate that I could actually take the piece. We have all our pieces moving quite well now. So the only one we've got to take a lot more consideration for is the king. So you can see in this example, I've got the bishop attacking the square in front of the king. But at the moment, if I click on the king, you can see he can move there, which is fine, but there he's not allowed to move, and nothing is stopping that. So if I do that, he's just put himself into check, which is definitely an illegal move. So we'll have a look at that now. I've updated the code in the king valid moves. So now when we come in and we're checking each square to see if the king can move there, the first thing we do is see if there's a piece on that square. If there is a piece and it's of our colour, then we can't move there because one of our pieces is in the way. But now a new bit I added was to check if the square we're moving to is under attack from another piece. So I'll give you a look at that in a second. But otherwise, if it wasn't, then we look at if the piece is nothing and it's a valid square, it can move there. And if the piece is of the other person's colour, then that's a valid move, but we add it as the type of a able to take a piece move, and add the pieces we can take to the attack piece collection. I'll give you a look at this is square under attack code now. So there's a clever way we can reuse the code we wrote before to make this work without adding a bunch of new code. And the way we do that is if we want to see if the bishop is attacking a square the king wants to move to, we just call the bishop valid moves using the file and rank of the square we want to check with our current piece color. It doesn't matter that there isn't actually a bishop on this square. It will check for pieces it would be attacking just like there was a bishop on it. And now the bishop results returns the pieces it's attacking. We can check this collection, and if any of the pieces in the collection is a bishop, then we know the square is also being attacked by a bishop. So we can repeat this for every piece type, which is a much better way than writing code to loop through every piece, getting all their valid moves to see if any of them can move to the square we're looking at. So that's a little confusing. So I'll show you an example of that working. So I've set up the board to show you an example of what I mean. So we've got the king here and we want to check if it can move to this square. And this square is currently under attack by the bishop, as well as a few other pieces for the example. So the way we'll check that is to pretend there's a bishop on this square and see what it's attacking. So I've set up some example code which will actually add a bishop to this square so we can sort of see an example of that. So if I click it, there's a bishop here. So we call the valid moves of a bishop for that square. And we can see, it's attacking this bishop, which means that bishop is also attacking this square. So if I change it to a horse and do that again, we can see this horse is attacking this one, which means the reverse is true, that horse can attack back. And same with a pawn. So if this one is attacking this pawn, it means that pawn is attacking this square. So we can have a look at that now. When I click on the king here, it's allowed to move here, but it no longer sees this square as a valid move because it's under attack by the bishop. So that gets us a step closer to getting the king moving correctly. I've added one more check to the king valid moves, and that's this one here saying, is the king within one square of the other king? So that will help stop the kings from getting too close to each other. So I did this with a separate function because the is square under attack method does go through checking all the different piece types. But if we were to check if a king was attacking the square we wanted to move to, as part of its code, it would call the king valid moves again, which would come in and call the is square under attack again, which would then come back and call this method again and would get in a never-ending loop doing that. So here I've added a new parameter to say, are we checking the king moves? So in the square under attack, if we are checking the king moves, then calling this king valid moves again. But when it calls it, we'll use a false and we'll skip this bit and use the new code that we've added instead to say, is the king in one square of the other king? So all that does is it's pretty much a copy of the king valid moves, just making sure the 8 squares around it don't already contain a king. Now we have all the basic moves working, it's time to have a look at some of the special moves that we'll need to add. So one of the obvious ones is the king and using castling. So you can see at the moment, if I have this sort of a setup, I'm able to do a castle normally, but with this one, if I go to move to the castling square, it doesn't allow it because we haven't added any code for that. So we'll have a look at that. So I've gone to Wikipedia just to check it all, and the rules are laid out here for castling. So I've just put that in a notepad to make it a bit clearer. So the first rule is we're going to have to add some code for that because it says neither the king nor the rook has previously moved. At the moment, we're not actually storing a move list, so we're not able to tell that. So we'll have a look at that first before we get to the rest of the rules. To keep a track of all the moves that have been made so far, I'm going to start off making a simple class move class. So I've added an enum with all the different types of moves that may happen. We're not using them all yet, but they'll probably come into play sometime soon. And in the class, I've just given it a key, what piece was moved as the object, the move that was made, so this is the file and rank of the move from location as well as the file and rank of the move to location all put together. And the move type, which is the enum. And if we took a piece, I'm also keeping a hold of that so we can show that if we would like. Then I've made another class to store the collection of moves using a keyed collection of the class move class and just using an incremental key. And I've got a clear function and added an add function that takes all our parameters to make it easier to create one. So on my form designer, I've also added a list view now. So the plan is we'll show the moves as they're happening now that we've got a collection storing them all. So we'll have a look at the code for all that. So in the load function of the form, I add some columns to the list view, one to store the move and one to store if a piece was taken. And I've also here added an image list so we can give some images to the list view and set the small image list of the list view to this image list. So here we will add the image for each piece into the image list. And we'll just use the name of it, the type and the color as the key put together. So when we call the board setup, we either make a new collection of the moves or clear it if there's already one there, which will be useful when you start a new game, and clear the list view of moves. So the next part is now when we return a piece was moved from our board and we call either the player moved or the computer moved, in them methods, we go in and make a move class and look up at the top here. When we are making the move, we see if there is a piece on the square we moved to, meaning we just took a piece. So down here, if that is set, we'll add the piece on end, and if there was nothing on the end square, then we just add a nothing or null to it. And once we've added the move to our collection, I've added a new bit of code here to add the move to the list view. So this is just a simple one. We get the image based on the piece that moved and its color, add it with the move notation string, and then if there was a piece taken, we add that here, and if not, we just add a blank string. So let's see that in action. Okay, so now if I move a piece, you can see it's added the piece with its start square, E2, and its end square, E4, added together as the move. And if I move another piece, it will add that it was the black pawn that moved. And if I take him, you'll see it added the move as well as stated that it took a piece on that square. So our moves list is looking quite good. So now we can get back to the problem of allowing a king to castle. Now that we have a collection of the moves that were made, when a piece is selected, we pass into the calculate valid moves method the collection of previous moves. That's here. And once we've got it there, we can pass it into the king valids move method. So once it's gone through and checked all its normal valid moves, we'll come down to the bottom and we'll check for kingside castling and queenside castling. So the first thing we do is get the rank for the king based on what color we currently have selected. And then we call the can kingside castle, passing in the current piece color, file rank, the king rank, the board and the moves. So I've copied the rules here from the Wikipedia page I was on before. So we'll go through them, and if any of them fail, we'll exit out before we return that they can kingside castle. So the first one is neither the king nor the rook has previously moved. So the first thing we'll do is make sure the selected piece is currently on the E file and on the king rank, meaning it's still right at the beginning. And we'll also make sure the castle we're trying to castle with is still on the H rank. Sorry, the H file and the king rank. So it hasn't moved either. But we've also got to make sure they haven't moved and then been moved back to their initial position. So this is where the collection of moves comes in. So we just check through all the moves in the list that the king's file and rank hasn't been added, meaning it's never moved, and then do the same with the rook's file and rank. So the next rule is the squares between the king and the rook are unoccupied. So that's a pretty easy one. We just have a look at the square next to the king, and if the piece is nothing, then there's nothing on it. And then have a look at the square 2 pieces over from the king and make sure there's nothing on it as well. So the third rule is the king is currently not in check. So with our is square under attack method we built before, that makes it easy. So we just use the king's file and rank and say, is that square under attack? If no one's attacking that square, then it's not, the king currently isn't in check. And the last rule is the king does not cross over or end up on a square attacked by an opposing piece. So to do that, all we have to do is look at the square beside the king and make sure it's not currently under attack. And then look at the second square over from the king and make sure it's not currently under attack. And if all them rules pass, then we'll return true that a kingside castle is allowed. So the queenside castle is pretty much identical. The only difference being is the ranks and files that we're looking at. So we also make sure they haven't made a move. Here there's 3 squares to check that there's nothing on them. Make sure the king isn't in check. And here we only have to worry about 2 squares not currently being under attack, mainly because the rule says the king does not cross over or end up on a square attacked by an opposing piece. And with a queenside castle, he will end up 2 over from where he is, which means the rook has a square beside it that the king never crosses. And the rule doesn't say that the rook crosses a square under attack, so then this is fine. We say a queenside castle is allowed. So now what we've got to do is show the user that that is a valid move so they know they can make it. After I've confirmed you can do a king or queenside castle, I add to the valid move collections the castling square with the type of castle on it. So I've updated the board painting code for paint valid moves to now look for this move type being a castle, and if it is in the list, then I've just made a path here, drawing some lines to make a crown shape to show the castling move is slightly different than the other ones that just draw an ellipse. So I've got that running and we can see it in action. So I've moved the chess pieces around so you don't have to watch me do all that. So white's set up for a kingside castle, got all the moves, the king hasn't moved, the castle hasn't moved, nothing's checking it. So now when I click here, you can see, we can do a kingside castle. And I've set up black for a queenside castle. And when I click on it, you can see, a queenside castle is possible for that. We're almost there with castling. There's only one more bit to go. So if I click on the king, it knows that it can do a castling move. The only thing is, if we do that now, the king moves, but we've got to update the code to detect that it was a castle move and make the rook move to its correct position as well. In both the player move and the computer move, I've added a new method call now saying check for special moves. So when we get here, currently the piece is the king and we've got its move locations. So once the move's complete, we set the current square with the king to have no piece and set the new square to have the king on it. So in the check special moves, this is where we check for the rook's movement. So first we get the king rank based on the current color of the king we're moving and check if it was moved to the king ranks and the correct castling square for either a king side or a queen side. Then this is where we get the piece, the rook's square, set it to nothing and move the rook castling square to contain the rook now. So I'll show you that working. Now if I click on the king and move it to the castling square, you can see the rook jumps correctly over where it should to complete the castle. And the same will happen when you do a queenside castle with black. Another special move we have to take into consideration is the pawn en passant move. So I've gone to Wikipedia and found the rules there. I've just copied them into a notepad to make them easy to read for now. So for an en passant, the enemy pawn must have advanced 2 squares on its previous move, and the capturing pawn attacks the square that the enemy pawn passed over. So we'll have a look at adding that to our code now. I've updated the pawn valid moves code, so now it gets the current moves passed in, and that's used so we can check if the last move was the opponent's pawn moving 2 positions. So I've added the rank start for both where the pawn moved from and where the attacking pawn needs to be to check for this special move. So we've got our standard check for valid moves code here, the attacking moves there, and here's the new en passant move checking. So we go in and make sure the piece we've got selected looking for valid moves is on one of them en passant ranks. And then we check if the file on the right of that contains a piece, and that piece is a pawn of the enemy's color. Then we go in and check for the last move from the moves collection. So using that, we can check if it had made a 2-move move, then we know it's on our right, it has done a 2-move move, we're in the right spot to attack it. So we add that to our valid moves collection, saying we can take the piece, and also add that it is an attack piece. And then we do the same, checking the file on the left. We don't need to add any special drawing code to draw this move, because to that code it will just look like there was a piece on the square you want to take it, and we'll draw an ellipse on that square showing a piece can be taken. The bit we do have to update is once the player has moved, it will allow your pawn to move to the en passant square, but it's not going to take the other user's piece yet. So in the check for special moves, we'll update it to allow that. So there's our castling move. Now we've got the new en passant move. So it just has them same ranks as before, pretty much the same code as before, checks the last move, make sure it's all valid, and if it is, then it will set the square with the opponent's piece on it and set its piece to nothing, hence taking the piece. So we'll see that in action now. So I've set it up so my pawn's here, so if this pawn moves 2 squares, it has jumped over the square that this pawn is attacking. So we'll do that, and now when I click on my pawn, you can see, you can do an en passant move. And if we do that, it will take it, its piece disappears and adds a move to the move list, and we've got that all working now. The last thing we need to add to the check for special moves in the main form is when you get a pawn to the end and want to promote it. So in the case for pawn here, I'll just check if the color's white and it's got to rank 8, or if the color's black and it's got to rank 1, then we'll set the piece to nothing and move the pawn to the end row and do an invalidate. So you'll see that happen. Show the new form promotion dialog, and that's just a form that I've added here. It's just got 4 picture boxes on it. And then in the load code, it looks if we're looking at black or white pieces and shows the right images. And when you click one, it just sets the selected piece property. So once that has closed, because it's a show dialog, we can check the selected piece and set the current piece's type to the one they selected. And that will make it work. So I've set up the pieces now, so this pawn is right near the end where it can promote. So if I move it up now, you'll see we get our pawn promotion dialog where we can pick what sort of piece you want. So I'll pick a queen and it will change into that. And then if I click on the queen, I can see all the valid moves the queen will make, showing it is seen as a queen and not as a pawn anymore. So we're almost on the way to having our game fully working. The next big thing to look at is checks, checkmates, and stalemates. So at the moment, there's nothing even looking for checks. So if I was to put my bishop up here, you can see I'm checking the king. Now, of course, the other user has to address that straight away, but our code doesn't know that yet. So I can come in and make another move, and it allows that just fine, which is definitely a problem. So we'll get that fixed now. The first thing we need to start doing to handling checks is to be able to check if the king is in check. So I've added a new function to our valid moves class called isKingInCheck, and it simply passes in what color king we're looking to see if it is in check or not, and the whole board collection. So this is not too hard because we have our is_square under attack. The only difference is we're not clicking on a piece to see that, so we've first got to find where the king is based on what color it is. So I've just put a little simple method here that just loops through each square on the board looking for the piece that's a king of the right color and returns its file and rank. So once we have that, we can use file and rank with the is_square under attack, and that will return how many pieces are attacking that square, and if some are, then the king's in check. So I've just made a simple results class here that returns the king color, is it in check, and later on we'll add the is checkmate and is stalemate, as well as the pieces that are attacking it. So now we have an isKingInCheck method. We'll actually make it so the players can see when one of the kings is in check. So back on our form, after the player's done a move and we've made the piece move on the board, we'll now call our new method to see if the king of the opposite color is in check. So here we've got the piece's color that moves, so we'll just swap that over to the opponent's color, and then call our new isKingInCheck method, which gives back our results class, and we'll store that results class in a property on the board object so we can do some painting. So I'll flip over to the board. So I've got the isKingInCheck property here, and down when we're drawing our pieces, I'll now show the checks here. So if we have a piece on the current square, we have a result in the new isKingInCheck property, and the current piece we're drawing is a king and is of the color for the class we return saying is the king in check. And then here I'll do a select case true, just checking the different things. So if the king is in check, then we'll draw a red square around the king so the users can see that. Got the code running now, so I'll use my bishop and I'll put him up here to put the king into check, and we can see it's got a nice red square now showing the king is being checked. So the only bit we need to add next is a way to stop the opponent being able to move until he addresses the king being in check, because at the moment you can get another piece and still make the move. So we'll have to update our valid moves to not allow any moves that don't stop the king being in check. I've updated the calculate valid moves code now, so it will handle when the player's king is in check. So it goes through as normal at the start, building up all the valid moves that the current piece can make, and usually we'll just return the current moves for the piece. So instead of doing that now, we'll come into this new code to see if the king's currently in check. So we call our isKingInCheck method, and if it is in check, then we start a new collection of valid moves, but these are valid moves that stop the king being in check anymore. So the way we do that is first we're going to remove the piece we're checking from the board, and then we're going to go through each of the valid moves, and we'll set the valid move square to our current piece. But just before we do that, we've got to make sure there isn't an opponent's piece on that square already, or it will get lost. So if there is, we store that, and if there was nothing there, then this will just be nothing. And then we call the is king in check again to see if moving our piece to the valid piece square stopped the check. So if the check is false, then it means it did. So we'll add that to our valid moves collection. And once we're all done, we'll put that valid move square back to either the nothing piece or the opponent's piece that was originally there. And then go through and keep doing all the valid moves like that until we have a collection of moves that will stop the check. And then we return that instead of the normal valid moves. So let's see that in action now. So if I move my bishop up and check the king, it's in check. And if I click on the horse like before, you can now see it has no valid moves because none of them are going to stop the king from being in check. Now if I click on the king, it's showing if I move here, that will get him out of check, so that's valid. And of course he can't move here because he's still in check. But I can also use my queen, and you can see the only move it's allowed to make is the one that will stop the king being in check now. So before it would have allowed it to go there as well, but that would still leave the king in check. So it's the same with the bishop. It knows that one's a valid one to stop the check, or with the knight, it knows either of these two will stop the bishop from checking the king. So if I move to one of them, you see he stops being red now because of our after the move check, and all looks good. There is still one problem with our current checking moves. So I've got the board where it was before. If white then makes another move, at the moment you can still move yourself into check. So this knight is blocking the bishop from checking the king, but there's nothing at the moment to stop me from moving it away, and that's technically not allowed because you've just moved yourself into check. So that will be the last little bit of this one before we move on to looking for checkmates and stalemates. So to check for that scenario, I've updated the calculate valid moves method again. Where we were doing the is king in check before, we just need to add an extra bit before that. So I've added that just here. So the first thing we do is make sure the piece that we're trying to move isn't the king, otherwise this check isn't needed anyway. But if it's not, we'll go through and we'll remove the piece from its current square and take it off the board by setting it to nothing. So that way when we do the is king in check, it will be if another piece is checking it and the only thing that was blocking it is the piece we're about to move. And if that's in check because of that, or because it's still in check from another piece, then we'll set the boolean to true. And once we've done that, we'll put the original piece back on its original square. And now instead of calling the is king in check, we'll just check that variable. So it covers both them scenarios of the king currently being in check, or you moving a piece that will leave the king in check. Got the board set up to where we were before, so you can see the horse that's blocking the bishop now no longer has any valid moves, because it knows if we moved out of the way, then the king's going to end up in check, and that's not allowed. So we've solved that problem as well now. I've updated the is king in check code. So now when we go through and determine the king is in check, I'm then going to check to see if it's currently a checkmate on the king or not. So one thing I did add was an are we checking for checkmate to this method. So when we're just checking for valid moves, we don't have to do that because it's a bit of code to go and check for a checkmate. So why do it if it doesn't matter? But anytime you actually move a piece, then this will be set to true and we will come in and check to see if it is in checkmate. So we'll have a look at the is in checkmate code now. So this was a tricky one. It took me a while to figure this out and fix quite a few bugs in it before I got it working properly. But in general, once you're in check, the rules to see if it is checkmate or not are these three simple rules. So can I move my king out of check? If so, then it's not checkmate. Otherwise, can I take the attacker? And being careful, the piece that we're taking the attacker with, when moved, doesn't open up another piece that is still checking the king. And the third one is, can I block the check? So can I move a piece in front of the attacker? But again, being careful that moving it doesn't allow another piece to check the king. So the first one, can I move my king out of check? That's pretty easy to do. We just call out king valid moves. And if there is any valid moves the king can make, then it's not check, because that already makes sure it won't move itself into check. So if the king cannot move anywhere, then we'll check for if we can take the attacker. We have the attacking pieces collection passed in. So this is all the pieces that are currently checking the king. And believe it or not, you can, in some certain scenarios, have more than one piece attacking the king at the same time. So if there's more than one, then it's checkmate, because you can't take both or block both pieces with one move. So we'll return to it's a checkmate. But if there's only a single piece attacking the king, then we'll come in and we'll see if we can take the attacker. So we do that by first getting the attacking piece and then using our is square under attack method with the attacking pieces file and rank to see if any of our pieces are attacking it. So if we do have some pieces that are attacking the attacker, then that's good, we can take them. But first we just have to make sure by moving that piece, we're not leaving another piece that can then get through and still check the king, or otherwise it's still a checkmate. So to do that, we go through the attacking pieces collection and calculate the valid moves for our piece that is attacking the attacker. And if it contains the square where the attacker is, it means we can take them, because the valid moves won't contain squares where if you moved it, it puts the king into check. So that's all good. If we can take them, it's not a checkmate, and we return false. So if we can't take the attacker, the only other option is to see if we can block the attacker. So the first thing we do is check what piece is attacking the king, because if it's a pawn, it's going to be one square away and you can't get anything in to block it. If it's a knight, you can't block a knight because it can jump over pieces. So only the bishop, rook and queen are pieces that we can get in the way of. Then we use the calculate valid moves to get all the squares where the attacker can move. That way we can see if we can get into any of them squares to block it. So one new bit I have added to make this bit work is when I'm making the valid moves, I've added if the move of that valid move is in the line towards the check. So I'll give you a quick look at that and then we'll get back into this code. So here's an example of that. In the rook valid moves, when we're checking for valid moves, we do store the pieces we're attacking. So if we test a line and at the end the piece we're attacking is a king, then I just go back through the last valid moves and set their move type to it's aligned towards check. And for any ones that are attacking another piece, they won't have this. So I've done that for all the different directions. There. And then also for the bishop valid moves, I've done that as well. And for the queen valid moves, it just called the rook and the bishop valid moves, so they're already built into that. So now we're going through the valid moves that attacker can make. We'll loop through them one by one, and if their move type is in the line towards the check, then that means we can see if we can block that square, which will essentially block the check. So to do that, we call the is square under attack on the valid move file and rank to see if any of our pieces can attack that square, meaning they can move onto that square. So it doesn't matter that there's not actually a piece there, it will let us know it's a square they're attacking even if it's empty. So one other check we needed to add separately was to check if a pawn can block the check line, because the is square under attack shows squares the pieces attack. So for pawns, that means jumping forward diagonally to attack. It doesn't check just moving in the way, because that doesn't count as an attack. So I've added this can pawn block checkmate method. So this method gets the file and the rank of the square we're checking if a pawn can get to, and also the color that the attacker is. So using that, we look for the pawn start rank so we can see if they can do a 2-move move, and also get a rank ahead 1 and a rank ahead 2 of the current square's rank. So that way we can see if on the board on the rank ahead there's a piece, and that piece is a pawn and the color isn't the same as the attacker's color, then it means that pawn can jump into the valid square, essentially blocking the check. And also if the rank ahead 2 happens to be the pawn start rank, it means you're in a square where that pawn can move 2 places. So we'll also check that 2 places ahead. If there's a pawn that's not of the same attacker's color, then it's a piece that can do a 2-move jump to block. So the last thing to do after checking for pawn blocks is to go through the collection of blocking pieces that were found along the 2 checks up here, and just make sure when we move one of them to block, we're not leaving the king in check from another piece we've just opened up. So we do that just like before, where we call the calculate valid moves for each blocking piece, and if the moves they return won't contain any moves that would leave the king in check by them moving there. So once we've done all that, if the valid moves contains one of the blocking pieces, then we know it's not a checkmate. They can block, so we will return false. And if all the checks have still not returned false yet, then we'll come through to the end and we'll say there's nothing else left to do. It's a checkmate, and return true for checkmate. So let's see a checkmate in action. So here I'll do the famous 3-move checkmate, where if the user makes this move, they'll get themselves in trouble real quick, and it relies on them moving certain ones out of the way. So if I move up to here, you can see I'm checking the king, and it's gone red, and it's gone red in the middle because there he's in checkmate. There's no piece that can block, the king can't move out of the way, and nothing can take the queen. So we've successfully detected a checkmate. The last piece to add to our is king in check method is the stalemate. So after we've done the is in check and is in checkmate, we'll also go in and see if it's a stalemate. So I've added some new code for that, and this one's not too tricky. All we do is check all the current player's pieces to see if any of them can move. So we do that just going through each square on the board, finding pieces, seeing if it's the current player's piece, and if so, see if they've got any moves. If they can move, then it's not a stalemate, so we'll return false. But if we make it the whole way through all their pieces and none of them have any valid moves, then it's a stalemate. So we return true, it is a stalemate. So I've set up a stalemate example, and that wasn't an easy thing to do when you've actually got to play valid moves the whole way to get there. But this one's set up so this king piece, there's not many places he can move. The horses covering him here, he can go to this square, but it's black's go. So if black decides to take the castle with the king, and then both kings light up red to show it's a stalemate. And if we click on this king, you can see there's no valid squares where he can move. So, yep, it's a stalemate. So that concludes my tutorial on making a chess game. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, give us a subscribe and a like. There is still a bit more we can add to this chess game. It's fully functional but quite simple at the moment, which is perfect when trying to understand and follow the code. The next version will include things like saving the game's moves, themes and options, and hooking up the open source Stockfish chess AI engine to allow playing against the computer. I will make a new video when I have that part finished. If you do happen to notice anything I've missed in my chess rules, let me know as it's a work in progress. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please subscribe and give us a like. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.